My son locked me out of our family cabin during a thunderstorm, shouting, "Maybe a little time out here will cool you off, old man." While I was shivering in the cold, drenched to the bone, I could see him through the window, pacing with a smug look on his face. But when he finally came back out to the porch, I didn't plead or argue. I just held up my phone, where an open call was in progress, and his face went from arrogant to absolutely horrified because he finally understood that his betrayal had just been broadcast live to the one person who could burn his entire world to the ground. Before we get into how it all went down, if you enjoy stories where the tables get turned, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments what city you're listening from. It really helps us out. The alarm on my nightstand goes off at 4:30 a.m. It has for the last 50 years. It's not one of those gentle, chirping sounds from a cell phone. It's the old buzzing clock radio Eleanor gave me for my 30th birthday. The sound is harsh, but it's familiar, and in a life where so much has changed, I cling to the familiar. The floorboards are cold under my bare feet as I make my way to the kitchen, muscle memory guiding me in the dark. The first thing I do, before anything else, is start the coffee. The gurgle of the machine is the true start to my day, a promise of the warmth and routine to come. By 5, I'm out the door, and in my old Ford pickup, the engine turning over with a familiar, grumpy roar. The streets of Maple Creek are still asleep, bathed in the soft gray light of pre-dawn. This is my favorite time of day. Quiet, peaceful, full of potential. I pull into the back lot of the Miller Plate, the diner my Eleanor and I poured our life savings and every ounce of our souls into back in 1975. The neon sign out front, with its cheerful buzzing coffee cup, flickers on as I flip the main breaker. The diner smells exactly as it always has. A mix of yesterday's coffee, old vinyl from the booths, and the faint sweet scent of the industrial maple syrup we buy by the gallon. It smells like home. My first hour is a ritual. I grind the beans, fire up the big flat-top grill until it sizzles with anticipation, and slice the day's bread. I do it all myself. At 72, most people think I should have retired a decade ago, handed the reins over to my son Mitch. But this place isn't a job, it's a living thing. It's my connection to her. Her picture sits right by the cash register, a faded photograph from the day we got the keys. She's got a smear of paint on her cheek, and a smile so wide and bright it could power the whole town. "For our future, Frank," she'd said that day, squeezing my hand. "A place for our family." I touch the corner of the frame every morning, a silent hello. I tell her about my plans for the day, about the leaky faucet in the men's room I need to fix, about how our granddaughter Lily is doing in school. It's a one-sided conversation, but it keeps her close. The truth is, this diner is all I have left of her, and I'd protect it with my life. I just never imagined the threat would come from the very family it was built for. The first regulars start to trickle in around 6 a.m. Sheriff Brody, who takes his coffee black and his eggs over easy, and Martha from the post office, who always orders a toasted corn muffin, no butter. The morning unfolds like a well-rehearsed play. The clatter of plates, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, the low hum of conversation, it's the music of my life. By 9, the morning rush is starting to thin out, and I'm wiping down the counter when the old rotary phone behind the register lets out a shrill, insistent ring. It's a sound that usually means a supplier is running late or a friend is calling to chat. But when I pick up the heavy receiver and say, "Miller Plate," the voice on the other end makes the knot in my stomach, one I didn't even know was there, tighten instantly. "Hey, Dad, just calling to see how the old man's holding up." It's Mitch. His voice is too loud, too cheerful, carrying that slick, polished sheen he gets when he's about to sell something. It's the voice he uses on investors, not the one a son should use with his father. I can hear the faint clink of porcelain in the background. He's calling from some trendy coffee shop downtown, the kind that charges $7 for a cup of coffee and calls it an experience. Here, in my world, coffee is 50 cents with a refill. "I'm fine, son," I say, my voice flatter than I intend, just the usual morning rush. He doesn't miss a beat, launching into a series of shallow questions about my health, the weather, and whether I saw the game last night. It's all a preamble, a warm-up for the main event. I've learned to recognize the pattern over the last few months. These calls started casually, but they've become more frequent, more pointed. "That's great, Dad, that's great," he says, his impatience bleeding through the forced enthusiasm. "Hey, I was just talking to a buddy of mine in commercial real estate, and your corner came up. You know, with the new development going in by the highway, The property values in that district they're going parabolic. There it is, the familiar jab, disguised as casual conversation. I stay silent, wiping a spot on the counter that's already clean. I know if I engage, I'm just walking into the spider's web, but my silence doesn't deter him. I mean, have you ever thought about what that land is actually worth, Dad? Not the diner, but the footprint. You're sitting on a gold mine. All that equity, just sitting there. He says the word equity like it's a sacred object. To me, it's a hollow, meaningless word. What I'm sitting on are memories. I'm sitting on the booth where Eleanor and I decided to name him Mitchell. I'm sitting on 50 years of sunrises, of friendships, of a life built with my own two hands. It's not for sale, Mitch, I say, keeping my voice low and even. I don't want Martha, who is lingering over her second cup of tea, to hear the tension. A sigh, heavy with frustration, crackles through the phone line. It's the sound of a salesman who's just had the door politely closed in his face. I'm just saying, Dad, you should think about monetizing the asset. Live a little. You've earned it. The suggestion that selling Eleanor's legacy would be living feels like a slap in the face. Before I can respond, his tone shifts back to that artificial brightness. Anyway, gotta run. Big meeting. Just wanted to check in. Talk soon. And with that, he's gone. I slowly place the receiver back in its cradle. The silence of the diner feels different now, heavier. The comforting hum of the morning has been replaced by a low, anxious buzz in my own head. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions brewing fresh pots of coffee, calling out orders to the kitchen, making small talk with the lunch crowd, but the anxious buzz in my head never really went away. It was like a radio playing static just loud enough to be distracting, a constant reminder of my son's intentions. By the time I was locking the front door at 8 o'clock, a deep weariness had settled into my bones. The satisfying ache of a hard day's work was replaced by a hollow, emotional exhaustion. I was just about to get into my truck when my cell phone, a simple flip phone Jenna insisted I carry for emergencies, started vibrating in my pocket. The screen lit up with Mitch's name, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I knew I shouldn't answer, but the foolish, hopeful part of a father's heart, the part that always wants to believe the best in his child, made me flip it open. This time, his voice was different. The slick salesman was gone, replaced by a softer, more earnest tone, the one he used as a kid when he wanted to borrow the car after missing his curfew. "Hey, Dad. Sorry if I was a little intense this morning," he began. The apology was a well-practiced move, designed to disarm me. "Things have just been really stressful with the new venture. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. My ventures were built on calloused hands and balanced books, not on buzzwords and other people's money. "Listen," he continued, not waiting for me to respond. "That's actually why I'm calling. Jenna and I were thinking, we all need to unplug. Let's head up to the cabin on Whispering River this weekend. Just us, like the old days." The cabin. The words hung in the air, heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 happy memories. I pictured the stone fireplace Eleanor and I built by hand, the rickety wooden dock where I taught a 5-year-old Mitch how to cast a fishing line. It was our sanctuary, the one place on earth that felt truly sacred. The thought of going there now, with this ugly tension hanging between us, felt like a desecration. It was a cynical choice of location, and we both knew it. "I don't know, Mitch. It's a busy weekend here," I said, the lie sounding weak even to my own ears. He must have been expecting that because his next move was ruthlessly effective. "Oh, hold on a sec, Dad. Someone wants to say hi." There was a brief rustle, and then a small, bright voice filled the phone. "Grandpa?" It was Lily. My heart ached at the sound of her voice. "Daddy says we're going to the cabin. Are you going to come? We can make s'mores and you can show me how to find the crayfish in the river again. Please, Grandpa. It won't be fun without you." She drew out the please with all the dramatic flair a 9-year-old could muster. And just like that, I was cornered. Checkmate. Mitch had deployed his most powerful weapon, and he knew I couldn't defend against it. Saying no would mean disappointing her, and that was a line I could never bring myself to cross. "Of course, sweetheart," I heard myself say, the words feeling like a surrender. "Grandpa will be there." I could hear her squeal with delight before she handed the phone back to her father. "She's so excited, Dad," Mitch said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "This will be great for all of us. We'll see you Saturday morning." He hung up before I could say another word. I stood alone in the dark parking lot, the phone still pressed to my ear. The night air felt cold and heavy. I had just agreed to spend the weekend in the most precious place from my past, and I had never been more certain that I was walking straight into an ambush. Saturday morning arrived with a heavy, overcast sky that seemed to mirror my mood. I closed the diner for the weekend, leaving a note on the door for the regulars, an act that felt strangely final. Back at the house, I packed a small duffel bag with a sense of grim obligation. I threw in my old flannel shirt, a worn copy of a fishing magazine, and the thermos I always took, filling it with strong black coffee from the diner. My hands paused as I opened the hall closet and looked at my old fishing rod, the one Eleanor had given me for our anniversary decades ago. I hesitated, then grabbed it, along with my beat-up tackle box. It was a foolish act of hope, a defiant gesture against the dread that had settled in my gut. I was arming myself with the memories of what this place was supposed to be about, even as I drove toward what I feared it would become. The drive is 2 hours, and for the first hour, the familiar rumble of my pickup's engine was the only sound. The 4-lane highway eventually gave way to the winding country roads I knew by heart. As the landscape shifted from strip malls to dense forests of oak and pine, my mind drifted backward. I saw the turnoff for Miller's Creek and remembered a 10-year-old Mitch bouncing in the passenger seat, pointing out the window with a wide, gap-toothed grin, so excited he could barely sit still. He loved the cabin more than anywhere on earth back then. He loved the smell of the pine needles, the thrill of spotting a deer at dusk, the taste of fire-roasted marshmallows, sticky and burnt, just the way he liked them. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as a particularly sharp memory surfaced. It was the summer he turned 7. We were sitting on the dock, his small hands struggling to bait a hook. I was showing him how to tie a proper fisherman's knot, my large, clumsy fingers guiding his. He was so focused, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he finally caught his first fish, a tiny bluegill, no bigger than my palm, he let out a whoop of pure joy that echoed across the river. He held it up to me, his eyes shining with pride, and in that moment he was the center of my universe. That boy, the one with so much love for the simple, honest things in life, where did he go? The nostalgia soured as other, more recent memories began to intrude, colored by the suspicion I now felt. I remembered Mitch in his late teens, bringing a girlfriend to the cabin and casually asking, "So what do you think a place like this is actually worth?" At the time, I dismissed it as youthful curiosity. Now, it felt like the first tremor of an earthquake. I thought of a dinner a couple of years back when he'd thrown around terms like leveraging family assets and unlocking dormant capital. He'd been talking about his latest tech venture, and his words, which had seemed so abstract and impressive then, now felt predatory. They weren't just words, they were a worldview. A worldview where everything, even a sacred family place, had a price tag. The most chilling memory was from last fall. I'd overheard him on the phone with Jenna, his voice sharp and strained. "We just need to stay liquid for a few more months," he'd said. "If I can't close this next round of funding, I don't even want to think about it." I had told myself it was just the stress of a new business. I hadn't wanted to see the desperation behind it. I had been a fool. When I finally turned onto the long gravel road leading to the cabin, the dread was a physical weight in my chest. And then I saw it, parked right next to the old woodpile, Mitch's car. It was a sleek, black European SUV that cost more than I made in 2 years at the diner. It was a monument to the life he was trying to project, a life of success and wealth that I was beginning to realize was built on a foundation of sand. I pulled my dusty Ford truck up beside it and killed the engine. I looked at the cabin, our cabin, with its familiar stone chimney and welcoming porch. It looked the same as it always had, a timeless sanctuary nestled in the woods. But I knew, with a certainty that made me feel cold to my very soul, that I was about to fight for its life. Before I could even put the truck in park, the cabin door flew open and Lily came sprinting out, her pigtails flying behind her. "Grandpa!" she yelled, launching herself into my arms the moment I stepped onto the gravel. I held her tight, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of sunshine and childhood. For a fleeting second, her genuine, unconditional love was a shield, and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. But the moment was shattered when Mitch appeared on the porch, a wide, artificial smile plastered on his face. "Dad, you made it! We were just about to send out a search party," he boomed, striding over to give me a stiff, one-armed hug. It felt less like an embrace and more like a pat-down. Jenna followed a few steps behind him, her movements hesitant. She was holding a dish towel, wringing it between her hands. "Hi, Frank," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She wouldn't meet my eyes, her gaze fixed on a spot somewhere over my left shoulder. The shield was gone. I was in enemy territory. The afternoon was a masterclass in forced pleasantries. We walked down to the river, and I helped Lily find the flattest stones for skipping, showing her how to flick her wrist just right. All the while, Mitch kept up a running monologue about his work, dropping names of tech CEOs and talking about disrupting the industry. He was performing, trying to project an aura of success and brilliance, but his anxiety was a buzzing fly that wouldn't leave the room. He kept glancing at his phone, his thumb restlessly swiping at the screen. He was a man waiting for a bomb to go off, and I was beginning to suspect I was the one holding the detonator. The tension came to a head over dinner. Jenna had made a pot roast, the kind of comforting Sunday afternoon meal that felt completely at odds with the thick, suffocating atmosphere in the cabin. The conversation was painfully stilted. We talked about the weather, we talked about Lily's upcoming school play, we talked about everything and nothing, the real subject sitting in the middle of the table like an uninvited guest. The sound of our forks scraping against the plates seemed deafening. Lily, who usually chattered nonstop, was unusually quiet, sensing the cold front that had moved in between the adults. She kept looking from my face to her father's, sir, brow furrowed with a confusion that broke my heart. After dinner, Jenna quickly cleared the table and announced it was time for Lily to watch a movie in the back room. It was all too clearly a planned maneuver. The moment Lily was out of earshot, the pretense of a happy family weekend evaporated completely. Mitch leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, the charming host replaced by the desperate CEO. "Dad, I'm glad we have this chance to talk, just us," he started, his voice taking on a low, serious tone. "The reason I wanted you here, it's about the future. My future, Lily's future." He launched into his pitch. It was a dizzying storm of buzzwords and projections, talk of scalable solutions and next-generation platforms. He painted a picture of his tech company as the next big thing, a revolutionary idea that was just one final investment away from changing the world. He spoke with a feverish energy, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of genuine belief and raw panic. And then he got to the point. "The final round of seed funding is closing," he said, his voice dropping. "I'm almost there, but I have a small shortfall. The investors, they need to see that I'm all in, that my own family is backing me. That's where the diner comes in." He finally looked at me, his gaze intense. "I've had it appraised, Dad, quietly. The land alone is worth enough to close the deal and then some. We sell it. I secure the funding, and I can cut you in for a small percentage. You've worked your whole life. It's time to cash out. It's the perfect solution." He leaned back, a look of triumphant finality on his face, as if he'd just presented an argument so logical, so brilliant, that it couldn't possibly be refuted. All the while, Jenna sat beside him, silent as a stone, her head bowed, staring at her hands as if the fate of the world was written in her palms. The air was thick with his demand, and the silence that followed was my answer waiting to be spoken. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, letting the weight of his words settle. I looked at my son, at his eager, desperate face, and for a second I didn't recognize him. The boy I had taught to fish, the young man I had been so proud of, was gone. In his place was a stranger who spoke a language of assets and equity, a man who could look at his mother's dream and see only a price tag. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet, but it was as solid and unmovable as the stone foundation of the cabin itself. "No," I said. The word was so simple, so final. It seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Mitch stared at me, his triumphant smile faltering. "No? What do you mean, no? Did you not hear me? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "I heard you, son," I said, my gaze steady. "I heard a lot of talk about money, about property values and seed funding, but I didn't hear you mention your mother once." I leaned forward slightly, my hands flat on the old oak table. "Eleanor and I built that diner with our bare hands. We painted the walls, we laid the tiles, we poured every cent we had and every ounce of love in our hearts into that place. It's not an asset, Mitch. It's her legacy. It's our home. And my answer is no. Today, tomorrow, and forever. It will never be for sale." The change in him was instantaneous. The mask of the brilliant, charming entrepreneur disintegrated, revealing something ugly and panicked underneath. His face flushed a deep red, and he shot up from his chair, the legs scraping violently against the wood floor. "Are you kidding me? Forever? You're gonna let your ridiculous sentimentality ruin your granddaughter's future?" he spat, his voice rising with each word. "That diner is a greasy spoon relic from the 50s. It's a dead end. I'm offering you a way out, a way for our name, the Miller name, to mean something in the 21st century, and you're talking about ghosts?" "That greasy spoon put you through college," I said, my own anger beginning to smolder. "It paid for your first car. It paid for your wedding to that wonderful woman sitting right there, who you don't seem to be considering in any of this." My words hit him like a physical blow. He started pacing, running his hands through his hair like a caged animal. "You just don't get it. You've never gotten it. You're content to flip pancakes for pocket change while the world moves on. There are people I have to answer to, Dad. Serious people. This isn't a request anymore. Is that a threat?" I stood up slowly, my 72-year-old body feeling every bit of its age, but my resolve was iron. "Are you threatening me in my own cabin?" That's when he snapped. The last thread of his control broke. He lunged across the small room and grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into the muscle with surprising strength. His face was inches from mine, his eyes wild with a desperation that was terrifying to behold. "You stubborn old fool," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You need to cool your head. You need to think straight." He half dragged, half pushed me toward the front door. I was so stunned by the physical assault that I could barely resist. Jenna gasped, a small, choked sound, but she remained frozen in her chair. Mitch fumbled with the deadbolt, wrenched the door open, and shoved me out onto the porch. The cool, damp night air hit me like a shock. As I stumbled to regain my balance, I heard the heavy, final thud of the door slamming shut, followed by the metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. I stood there, breathless, staring at the solid wood that now separated me from my family. From inside, I could hear his muffled shouts, the sound of his rage echoing within the walls of the sanctuary my wife and I had built for our son. At that exact moment, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley, and the first cold, heavy drops of rain began to fall from the dark sky. They landed on my face, mingling with the hot, angry tears that I couldn't stop from forming in my eyes. He had cast me out. My own son had physically thrown me out of our home. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute. It felt like a part of my soul had been ripped away. The rain began to fall harder, soaking my shirt, but I barely felt the cold. All I could feel was the searing heat of a broken heart. For how long I stood there, I don't know. Time seemed to stretch and warp. The cold rain plastered my thin shirt to my skin, and a deep, shivering chill began to work its way into my bones. But it was that physical cold that finally broke the spell of my shock. The raw, animal instinct for survival kicked in. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stand on the porch of my own home like a beggar. The searing heat of betrayal began to cool, replaced by something much harder and colder: resolve. Each step I took off that porch and into the muddy driveway was deliberate. I didn't look back. The cabin, once a symbol of love and connection, now felt like a crime scene. I fumbled for the keys in my wet pocket, my fingers stiff and clumsy, and finally managed to unlock the door to my old truck. I slid onto the cracked vinyl seat, the smell of old oil and damp metal a strange comfort. I was soaked, shivering, and utterly alone. My mind raced. What do I do? Who do I call? My first thought was Sheriff Brody, but what would I say? My son was rude to me. He locked me out. It sounded petty, childish. It didn't capture the violence of the act, the deep spiritual wound he had inflicted. Then I remembered David, my lawyer and oldest friend. We had an appointment scheduled for next week to update my will, an appointment I was now certain needed a radical revision. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my flip phone. It was late on a Saturday night, and I fully expected to get his voicemail. But I needed to tell someone. I needed my voice, my story, to exist outside the walls of that cabin. To my surprise, David answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Frank, is everything all right?" he asked, his immediate concern a balm on my frayed nerves. "David, I'm sorry to call so late," I began, my voice cracking with an emotion I couldn't control. "Something's happened. It's Mitch. I'm at the cabin, and he..." Just then, the cabin door creaked open. A rectangle of warm yellow light cut through the darkness, and Mitch stepped out onto the porch. He was silhouetted against the light, and he peered out into the rain, his shoulders slumped. He saw me in the truck and started walking towards it. His expression changed. The rage was gone, replaced by a look of haggard, desperate urgency. He clearly thought his tactic had worked, that he'd let me cool off and I was now ready to be reasonable. In that split second, as he walked towards me, something shifted inside me. The grief and the shock were still there, but a cold, sharp clarity cut through them. I looked at the phone in my hand, at David's name on the screen. An idea, born of pure instinct and righteous anger, took hold. My thumb moved deliberately and pressed the speakerphone button. The small icon lit up on the screen. I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat, the speaker pointing up into the cab. Mitch reached the driver's side window and tapped on the glass. I rolled it down a few inches, letting the rain and the sound of his voice in. "Dad, look, I'm sorry," he said, though the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. "I shouldn't have shoved you. I panicked." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the kind of voice you use when you're telling a secret you know is shameful. "You have to understand the kind of pressure I'm under. This isn't just some business deal. These people I'm involved with, they're not venture capitalists from Silicon Valley. They don't care about quarterly reports. They care about results, and they care about deadlines." I said nothing. I just stared ahead through the rain-streaked windshield, my heart hammering against my ribs. My silence was his invitation to keep talking, to fill the void with the truth he had so carefully hidden. "They're dangerous, Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They came to the house. They talked to Jenna when I wasn't there. They made it very clear what happens if I don't deliver. They know where Lily goes to school, Dad." He choked on the words. "They sent me a picture of her on the playground. A picture, Dad. So when I tell you I need that money, I'm not talking about my future. I'm talking about hers. Selling the diner is the only way out. It's the only thing I have that can get us clear of them." He finally ran out of words, his confession hanging in the damp air between us, a raw, ugly testament to his fear. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, expecting sympathy, expecting me to finally break. I let the silence stretch for another beat, letting his words fully sink into the microphone of the phone on the seat. Then, I turned my head and looked him square in the eye. My voice, when it came out, was steady and cold as ice. "Well, I hope you were clear, son." I paused, then gestured with my head toward the passenger seat, because my lawyer, David, heard every single word of that. The transformation on Mitch's face was terrifying. The pleading, the desperation, it all vanished, replaced by a ghastly, pale mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted from my face to the dark shape of the phone on the seat and back again, the reality of what he had just done crashing down on him with the force of a physical blow. In that moment, the power dynamic between us didn't just shift. It was obliterated. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to see the horror on his face curdle into pleading or anger. For the first time in this whole ugly affair, I was the one in control, and I used that control to end the conversation. I picked up the phone from the passenger seat. "David, I'm heading home now," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "We'll talk in the morning." I ended the call without waiting for his reply, put the truck in reverse, and backed away. The crunch of the gravel under my tires was the only sound. In my rearview mirror, Mitch was a frozen statue, a silhouette of a man caught in the headlights, growing smaller and smaller until the rain and the darkness swallowed him completely. I turned the truck around and didn't look back. The 2-hour drive home was a lonely purgatory. The windshield wipers swept back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm, trying to clear away a storm that felt both external and internal. For the first 30 minutes, a cold, bitter satisfaction was all I felt. The shock of what had happened was replaced by a hard, crystalline anger. I had called his bluff. I had turned his own desperation against him. He had come at me with threats and manipulation, and I had met him with a quiet, undeniable truth captured over a phone line. I thought of the diner, of Eleanor's picture by the register, and felt a surge of fierce, protective pride. I had held the line, her legacy was safe. But as the miles of dark, rain-slicked highway stretched on, the anger began to dissolve, and underneath it was something far more painful. A deep, bottomless well of grief. The adrenaline faded, leaving me hollowed out and aching. I wasn't just grieving a terrible argument, I was grieving my son. The man who had shoved me, screamed at me, and confessed to being entangled with dangerous people was a stranger. The boy I had raised, the child I had loved more than my own life, was gone, and I had no idea when he'd left. It felt like I was driving home from a funeral for someone who was still alive. Halfway back to Maple Creek, the wave of sorrow became so overwhelming I had to pull over onto the muddy shoulder of the road. I cut the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the drumming of rain on the truck's roof. My hands were trembling as I reached for my wallet. Tucked behind my driver's license was a photograph, its edges soft and worn from years of being carried. I unfolded it carefully. It was Mitch, aged 10, taken right on the dock of the cabin. He was holding up that tiny bluegill, his face split by a grin of pure, unadulterated joy. His eyes, not yet clouded by ambition or fear, were shining with pride. He was so proud of himself, and so proud to show his dad what he'd accomplished. A sob caught in my throat, thick and painful. Where did he go? I stared at the smiling face of the boy in the picture, and I asked the question that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. Where did I go wrong? Was it the praise I gave too freely? The money for college I handed over without enough questions? Did I miss the signs? Did I ignore the small shifts in his character, the growing obsession with success at any cost, because I wanted so badly to believe he was still that innocent boy on the dock? The rain on the roof sounded like 1,000 accusing whispers. I folded the photograph and put it away, the ghost of my son tucked safely back in my wallet. Wiping my eyes with the back of my hand, I started the engine and pulled back onto the empty highway. The grief was still there, a heavy passenger in the seat beside me. But now, it was mingled with resolve once more, not the cold, angry resolve of a man who had won a fight, but the heavy, tired resolve of a father who knew the fight was far from over. It was after midnight when I finally pulled into my own driveway. The house was dark and silent, a stark contrast to the emotional storm I had just driven through. Every bone in my body ached with a weariness that went far beyond physical exhaustion. I walked through the quiet rooms, the familiar shapes of my life, Eleanor's favorite armchair, the photos of Mitch and Lily on the mantel, all seeming like artifacts from another man's happier existence. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just sank into a kitchen chair, the darkness a fitting companion to the emptiness that had taken root in my chest. I sat there for a long time, listening to the old refrigerator hum and the house settle around me, feeling the full weight of the night press down. Just as I was thinking of finally dragging myself to bed, a sharp, buzzing vibration startled me. My flip phone, which I dropped on the table, was rattling against the wood. I squinted at the small screen. It was a text message from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. It was from Jenna. My first instinct was to ignore it, to delete it without reading, but my finger hesitated. With a sense of weary resignation, I opened the message. The words were a jumbled, frantic rush. Frank, I am so sorry. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but please, can we meet tomorrow? Just us. There are things you don't know, things I couldn't say. Please, Frank. I'm scared. The word scared cut through my anger and exhaustion. It wasn't manipulative. It felt raw and genuine. My fight was with Mitch, but Jenna, she was Lily's mother. My protective instincts, the ones that had been screaming inside me all night, took over. I typed back a simple 2-word reply. Where? When? A moment later, she responded, The Corner Perk Cafe, 10 a.m. Thank you. The next morning, I was sitting in a booth at the back of the small cafe, a place chosen, I suspected, for its anonymity. I nursed a black coffee and waited. Jenna slipped in exactly at 10, moving like a hunted animal. She was pale, her eyes shadowed with dark circles that no amount of makeup could hide. She wore a long-sleeved turtleneck despite the mild autumn morning, and she kept glancing towards the door as if she expected to be followed. When she sat down opposite me, she couldn't seem to stop her hands from trembling. Thank you for coming, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I don't know where to start. Start with why you were scared, I said, my voice gentle but firm. That was all it took. The dam broke. In a torrent of hushed, panicked words, she told me everything. She explained that Mitch's tech company had been a fantasy, a house of cards built on borrowed money. But the money hadn't come from banks. It had come from investors who didn't use contracts and lawyers, but intimidation and threats. She told me how Mitch had become a different person over the last year, consumed by a fear he tried to hide behind a mask of bravado. It's not just about the money anymore, Frank, she said, her eyes welling up with tears. They're not just calling. They came to the house last week when Mitch was out. She took a shaky breath and slowly pushed up the sleeve of her turtleneck. My own breath caught in my throat. Dark, ugly purple and blue bruises circled her delicate wrist, the distinct shape of a man's fingers. He grabbed me, she whispered, pulling the sleeve back down as if ashamed. He told me to make sure my husband understood the importance of his obligations. He said it wasn't from Mitch. He wanted me to know they could get to me whenever they wanted. I felt a cold dread wash over me, colder than any rain. This was real. This was violent. The things Mitch said last night, she continued, her voice breaking. About Lily, it was true. 2 weeks ago, they sent him a photo, anonymously. It was a picture of Lily on the school playground, eating her lunch. There was a note. It just said, "We know what's most important to you. Make sure you do too." I stared at her, the pieces of the ugly puzzle clicking into place. Mitch's desperation, his cruelty, the unhinged rage. It wasn't the behavior of a greedy son. It was the terrified lashing out of a cornered animal, a father who was trying to save his family by destroying it. It didn't excuse what he had done to me. Nothing could. But it changed everything. My personal sense of betrayal, as deep as it was, suddenly seemed small. It was dwarfed by the very real, very immediate danger that was circling my granddaughter. Jenna and I were no longer on opposite sides of a family feud. We were now two people in a small cafe, bound together by a desperate, terrifying alliance. I reached across the small table and put my hand over Jenna's trembling ones. My touch was firm, steady. The shock that had coursed through me moments before had receded, replaced by a glacial calm. The fuzzy, emotional pain of betrayal had sharpened into a point of diamond-hard clarity. The objective was no longer to nurse my own wounds. It was to protect my granddaughter. "Jenna, listen to me," I said, my voice low and even, commanding her attention. "You did the right thing by telling me. Now, you need to do something else. Go home. Don't tell Mitch we spoke. You must act as if nothing has changed. Can you do that for me?" She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear but also a flicker of hope. She nodded, a single, sharp movement. "Good," I said, giving her hand a final, reassuring squeeze. "Let me handle it from here." I watched her slip out of the cafe, a ghost of a woman haunted by her husband's choices. I didn't go home. I drove to the one place where I could think clearly, the diner. It was closed, the chairs still stacked on the tables from the night before, but I let myself in the quiet, familiar space, surrounded by the ghosts of a better time. I pulled out my phone and called David. There was no preamble this time, no apology for the interruption. "David," I said the moment he answered. "Everything's changed. The situation is worse than I thought. I need to see you, now, in your office." My tone left no room for argument. "I'm on my way," he said simply. An hour later, I was sitting in a plush leather chair opposite David's mahogany desk, the Minneapolis skyline visible through the panoramic window behind him. I laid out the whole, sordid story, starting with Jenna's bruises and the threat against Lily. I recounted Mitch's desperate confession in the rain, the confession David himself had been a party to. I spoke without emotion, presenting the facts as if I were a witness describing a traffic accident. When I finished, David leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of profound shock and lawyerly fury. "My God, Frank," he breathed. "This is beyond a family dispute. This is criminal. Extortion, assault. We need to go to the police. Right now, with my testimony and the recording, they'll have him and these thugs he's involved with in cuffs by sundown." It was the logical, correct, by-the-book answer. And it was the wrong one. "No," I said firmly. David looked at me, stunned. "No police, not yet." "Frank, for God's sake, why?" he demanded. "Your granddaughter has been threatened." "And that is the only thing that matters," I countered, leaning forward, my voice dropping. "We call the police, and these people, whoever they are, will scatter like rats. Or worse, they'll panic. And if they panic, they might do something reckless before they're caught. I will not risk Lily's life on a maybe. We are not going to the police. We are going to solve the problem." David stared at me, seeing the steel in my eyes. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "I'm proposing we take control," I said. "Mitch is desperate for money to make this go away." "Fine, we'll make it go away. I'll use my retirement savings." "Not the diner," I added, my voice hardening. The diner is never touching this, my personal funds. But the money doesn't go to Mitch. It goes into an escrow account managed by you. You will contact these investors as his legal representative, offering to settle his debt in full in exchange for a signed document releasing him and his family from all further obligation. David's legal mind was already catching up, seeing the strategy, and if they refuse, they won't, I said with confidence. Men like this don't want legal trouble, they want their money. A lawyer offering a full payout is a better deal than threatening a desperate man who has nothing left. I paused, then delivered the final, crucial piece of the plan, and the money is our leverage over Mitch. My help is not a gift, it is a lifeline, and it comes with conditions. He will hand over every piece of information he has on these people. He will enter a debt rehabilitation program, and he will sign a legally binding contract, drafted by you, that gives me financial oversight over his affairs for the next 5 years. He will agree to all of it. What makes you so sure? David asked, though he already knew the answer. Because the alternative, I said, my voice cold as stone, is that I take my evidence, the recording of his confession, and Jenna's testimony about the threats to her and my granddaughter, and I walk it into the police station myself. We're not just saving him, David. We're giving him a choice. Accept our help and our terms, or face the consequences of his actions alone. David looked at me for a long moment, a slow smile of pure admiration spreading across his face. He picked up a yellow legal pad and a pen. All right, Frank, he said. Let's get to work. It took David and me the rest of Sunday and all of Monday morning to get everything in place. Legal documents were drafted, financial arrangements were made, and a precise strategy was set. The first move was a phone call, but it wasn't me who made it. At precisely 1 p.m. on Monday, David called Mitch's cell phone from his office line. I was sitting beside him, listening on speakerphone, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. Mitch Miller, please, David said when Mitch answered, his voice stripped of all warmth, leaving only crisp, professional authority. This is he, Mitch replied, his tone wary. Mr. Miller, my name is David Chen. I am Frank Miller's legal counsel, David stated. I am calling to inform you that a mandatory meeting has been scheduled to discuss the events of this past weekend. Your presence, along with your wife, Jenna's, is required. My office, tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Do you understand? There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Legal counsel? A meeting? Dad, what is this? Mitch stammered, his confusion quickly turning to defensive anger. This is not a negotiation, David said, his voice cutting through Mitch's protest. Be here, 2 o'clock. He hung up the phone, leaving no room for argument. The trap was set. The next day, I arrived at David's office 15 minutes early. We sat waiting in a large, sterile conference room on the 34th floor. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the gray afternoon sky, and the cityscape of Minneapolis stretched out below like a silent, indifferent witness. In front of David was a neat stack of documents, their sharp white edges a stark contrast to the dark wood. He had a small digital audio recorder placed precisely in the center of the table. We sat in silence, two old friends waiting to preside over the most painful board meeting of my life. Mitch and Jenna arrived exactly at 2. Mitch strode in first, trying to project an air of indignant confidence, as if this were all a ridiculous overreaction on my part. But his bravado faltered when he saw the scene. This wasn't a cozy family chat, this was a legal proceeding. Jenna followed him, her eyes finding mine for a brief, terrified second before she looked down at the floor. They took their seats on the opposite side of the vast table, the distance between us feeling like a chasm. David began without preamble. Thank you for coming, he said, his tone icy. We are here to discuss a series of actions that took place at your father's cabin this past Saturday. These actions, Mr. Miller, carry significant legal weight. Based on your father's testimony and corroborating evidence, you could be facing criminal charges, including, but not limited to, elder endangerment and coercion. Mitch scoffed, though it was a weak, hollow sound. This is insane. It was a family argument. You can't possibly. David held up a hand, silencing him. Before you say anything further, he said, his eyes fixed on Mitch, I think you should listen to this. He reached forward and pressed a button on the small recorder. The room was suddenly filled with the sound of falling rain, and then a voice, Mitch's voice. It was a desperate, panicked whisper, tinny and distorted by the recording, but unmistakably his. They're dangerous, Dad. They know where Lily goes to school, Dad. They sent me a picture of her on the playground. David pressed the button again, and the room fell silent. Mitch's face had gone completely white, the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. All the fight, all the bluster, all the arrogant indignation vanished, leaving behind the stark, naked terror of a man who had just heard his own words condemn him. He stared at the small black recorder on the table as if it were a venomous snake. He was trapped. The evidence was irrefutable. He slowly lifted his gaze to meet mine, his eyes wide with the horrifying final understanding of just how much power I now held over him. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. Mitch sat slumped in his chair, a man hollowed out by his own words. The color had not returned to his face. For the first time since this ordeal began, it was my turn to speak. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The power in the room had already shifted so completely that a whisper would have been as loud as a shout. "That recording is the sound of my son hitting rock bottom," I said, my voice calm and even, directed at Mitch but intended for everyone. "It is the sound of a man so lost and so scared that he was willing to burn down his own family to escape a fire of his own making." I let that sink in, then continued. "David has laid out one path for you, Mitch. The legal path, the one that leads to police stations, courtrooms, and likely a prison cell. It is the path you have earned." I paused, then pushed a single sheet of paper from my side of the table into the vast, empty space between us. "But I am your father, and a father's job is not to watch his son drown. A father's job is to teach his son how to swim, even when he's already halfway to the bottom." I looked him directly in the eye. "So I am offering you a different path. A harder one. This is not a negotiation. It is a lifeline, and these are the terms." I began to lay out what I had started to call, in my own mind, the Miller Accord. "First," I said, "the threat to your family will be neutralized. I will use my personal retirement savings, the money Eleanor and I put away for our old age, to settle your debt. David's firm will handle the transaction through a secure escrow account. They will be your legal shield. This will make you and your family safe." I saw a flicker of relief in Jenna's eyes, the first positive emotion she had shown all day. "However," I continued, my voice hardening slightly, "let me be absolutely, unequivocally clear on one point. The Miller plate is not, and never will be, for sale. It is not a financial asset. It is not a solution to your problems. That discussion is over, permanently. Second, this help is conditional upon your complete and total accountability. From this moment on, you will hide nothing. You will provide David with every name, every number, every detail related to these lenders. Your secrets end today. Third, you will address the sickness that led you here. You will enroll in a financial rehabilitation program for compulsive debt and mismanagement. You will also begin mandatory weekly counseling sessions to deal with the choices you have made. Jenna, you and Mitch will attend couples therapy to begin repairing the damage he has inflicted on your marriage. I saved the most difficult condition for last. And finally, for the next 3 years, you will relinquish your financial autonomy. A third-party forensic accountant, chosen and paid for by me, will manage all of your household and business finances. You will be given an allowance. Every dollar will be tracked. You will learn, from the ground up, how to live within your means. You will learn the difference between wanting and needing. I leaned back in my chair. All of this will be formalized in a legally binding contract. If you violate any of the terms, at any point, the deal is void. I will take the recording and Jenna's testimony to the authorities, and you will face that first path alone. This is your only way out, son. It is a path to redemption, not riches. What is your choice?" Mitch didn't look up. He stared at his hands on the table, his shoulders shaking. I saw a tear fall, then another. He looked broken, stripped bare of all his pride and delusion. He glanced at Jenna, whose expression was pleading with him to accept, to grab the lifeline. After a long, heavy silence, he finally nodded, a small, jerky movement. "Okay," he whispered, his voice raspy with shame. "Okay, Dad. I'll do it. I'll sign." David, without a word, took the neat stack of documents and slid them across the polished table. The sound of the paper gliding over the wood was the only sound in the room. He placed a pen on top of the signature page. For Mitch, it was the end of his destructive freedom. For our family, it was the first, painful step toward a new beginning. 6 months have passed since that cold, quiet afternoon in David's office. The heavy documents were signed, the wheels of the accord were set in motion, and the storm that had threatened to tear our family apart finally broke. The dangerous men my son had entangled himself with vanished the moment David's firm wired them their money, melting back into the shadows as quietly as they had appeared. There have been no more threats, no more mysterious pictures. My granddaughter is safe. That, above all else, has allowed me to sleep at night. The Miller plate is still here, of course. It is unchanged. The coffee is still 50 cents a cup, Sheriff Brody still comes in for his over-easy eggs, and Eleanor's picture still watches over the register. I'm a little more tired, perhaps. I feel the 72 years in my bones a little more keenly than I used to. But the anxious, angry buzz that had become my constant companion is gone, replaced by a quiet, settled peace. The relationship with my son is different. It is scarred, and the memory of his betrayal is a ghost that will likely always live between us. But it is also more honest than it has been in years. He is in his programs. He is in therapy. He is working a modest, humbling job while the court-appointed accountant manages his finances. Our Sunday phone calls are no longer filled with his grand ambitions, but with quiet talk of his progress, of what his therapist said, of a funny thing Lily did at school. He is slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding his life on a foundation of truth instead of sand. Trust is not a gift, I've learned. It's earned back one honest day at a time. This morning, a Sunday, the diner is closed to the public, but the grill is hot. Lily stands on a small step stool beside me, her face dusted with a fine layer of flour. She's wearing one of my big aprons, tied around her waist 3 times. I'm showing her the secret to the perfect pancake. You see, sweetheart, I say, guiding her small hand as she holds the ladle. You can't rush it. You have to wait for the bubbles to pop. That's how you know it's ready to flip. She watches with the same intense concentration her father used to have when he was learning to tie a fishing knot. She flips it perfectly, and a wide, proud grin lights up her face. Just then, the bell on the front door jingles. It's Mitch, here to pick her up. He stops and watches us for a moment. A complex expression on his face, a mixture of sadness, regret, and something that looks like hope. Look, Daddy, I made a pancake, Lily shouts, pointing at her golden brown creation on the grill. Mitch smiles, a real smile, not the one he used to wear. That you did, sweetie. It looks perfect. He looks over at me, his eyes meeting mine. She's a natural, Dad. She is, I say, ruffling Lily's hair. She's got the touch. He doesn't have the touch for business, my son. But maybe, just maybe, he's learning the recipe for being a good man again. It's a slow process, one ingredient at a time. And for now, that's more than enough. Oh yeah. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left